Case 1. When Jen Shah burst onto reality television screens in 2020, audiences couldn't look away. The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City introduced viewers to a woman who embodied excess in every form. Designer wardrobes worth fortunes, parties that seemed torn from fantasy, and a personality that sparked controversy with every appearance. Shah, born in 1973 to a Hawaiian and Tongan family, had spent years as a devoted wife to Sheriff Shah, a University of Utah football coach, raising two sons in relative obscurity. But when Bravo's cameras arrived, she transformed into someone entirely different, a reality television phenomenon who seemed to have unlimited wealth and zero filter. What viewers didn't know was that the luxury they watched wasn't built on legitimate business success. Federal prosecutors would later reveal that for nearly 10 years, Shah had been orchestrating an elaborate fraud scheme that targeted some of society's most vulnerable members. Working with business associates across multiple states, she ran telemarketing operations that promised elderly victims the keys to financial independence through online business opportunities. The pitch was compelling. Invest in these services, follow our guidance, and watch your bank account grow. The reality was devastation. The services held no value whatsoever, leaving thousands of victims with drained savings accounts and shattered dreams of security in their retirement years. The scheme operated through layers of shell companies and offshore accounts, making it nearly impossible to trace things. But federal investigators, including teams from the Department of Justice and FBI, had been building their case since 2019. They gathered wiretap recordings, analyzed financial transactions, and collected testimony from victims across the nation. The evidence painted an unmistakable picture of systematic fraud on a massive scale. March 2021 brought a moment that felt like reality television colliding with criminal justice. Federal agents arrested Shah at her Utah home, while Bravo's cameras were actively filming for the show. The footage never aired, but news of the arrest exploded across media platforms within hours. A reality star famous for flaunting extravagant wealth now faced accusations that every dollar had been stolen from vulnerable Americans. Charges included conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering, crimes carrying potential decades in prison. Shah initially maintained her innocence with the same fierce energy she displayed on television. She proclaimed during interviews and court appearances that she had nothing to hide, that investigators were targeting her unfairly. Her fans debated whether the charges held merit or represented persecution of a successful woman of color. But as evidence mounted and her trial date approached in July 2022, something unexpected happened. Just days before jury selection would begin, Shah appeared before a federal judge in New York and changed her plea to guilty. In a stunning reversal after months of denial, she admitted in open court that she had knowingly deceived victims and sold them services she knew held no value. January 2023 brought the sentencing hearing that would determine Shah's fate. Prosecutors requested 10 years behind bars, emphasizing the scope of fraud and the profound harm inflicted on thousands of victims. Defense attorneys argued for leniency, pointing to her role as a mother and citing charitable activities. Shah herself addressed the court with tears, expressing remorse for the pain she had caused. The judge sentenced her to 78 months, 6.5 years in federal prison, along with orders to pay $6.05 million in restitution to victims. Shah began serving her sentence in February 23 at a federal facility in Texas. From behind bars, she has occasionally released statements thanking supporters and promising to make amends. For Bravo viewers, her absence from The Real Housewives serves as a constant reminder that the drama they watched eventually transformed into genuine criminal consequences. Her story captured widespread attention because it merged the spectacle of reality television with the gravity of federal prosecution. To her audience, she represented larger-than-life entertainment. To her victims, she embodied broken promises and stolen security. Today, Jen Shah remains incarcerated with a projected release in 2028. Her legacy forever defined not by television fame, but by one of reality. TV's most shocking falls from grace. Case 2: most actors construct their characters from imagination and training. Felicia Pearson built hers from lived experience, a reality that made her portrayal of Snoop on HBO, The Wire, unforgettably authentic and deeply controversial. Millions of viewers watched her play a cold, calculating enforcer in Baltimore's drug trade, never realizing that Pearson's own history contained violence and incarceration that mirrored the character she brought to life with such chilling precision. Pearson's beginning held little promise of any future at all. Born in Baltimore in 1980, she entered the world prematurely, already addicted to the drugs her mother had used during pregnancy. The state immediately placed her in foster care, and she grew up moving through Baltimore's most dangerous neighborhoods, places where violence wasn't an occasional occurrence but a constant presence. Without stable family support or positive role models, Pearson navigated adolescence in an environment that offered few legitimate paths forward. At just 14 years old, Pearson's life reached a devastating turning point. In 1995, a confrontation with another teenage girl escalated into gunfire. Pearson pulled a weapon and fired, and the other girl died. Despite her youth, the court system treated the case with full seriousness. Convicted of second-degree murder, Pearson received 2 consecutive 8-year sentences. Because of her age and exemplary behavior behind bars, she ultimately served approximately 6.5 years before release. For most teenagers, that conviction would have permanently closed every door. But prison also became the unlikely place where Pearson began changing her trajectory. She earned her JED, spent time reflecting on the choices that had brought her there, and developed the toughness and survival instincts that would later inform her most famous. Released in 2000, Pearson returned to Baltimore, determined not to return to prison but uncertain what path her future might take. Her opportunity arrived through chance encounter. While spending time at a local nightclub, she met Michael K. Williams, the actor who portrayed Omar Little on The Wire. Williams recognized something unique in Pearson and introduced her to the show's producers. They took a chance on someone with no formal acting training, and soon she was cast as Snoop, a stone-faced, eerily calm soldier in Baltimore's drug organizations. Oh, her performance struck critics and audiences as remarkably realistic. Many called her one of the most authentic characters in the entire series, but that realism came with significant controversy. The family of the girl killed in 1995 expressed outrage that someone convicted of taking their loved one's life was now portraying violence on television for entertainment. To them, Hollywood seemed to be rewarding Pearson for her criminal past. Pearson countered that the role represented a genuine second chance, an opportunity to transform her experiences into legitimate work and prove she could build something meaningful. The debate only intensified media coverage, making her one of The Wire's most discussed cast members throughout the show's run and long after it ended in 2008. Yet Pearson's past continued shadowing her future. In 2011, she found herself swept up in a Baltimore drug raid and charged with conspiracy to distribute heroin. While far less serious than her teenage conviction, the charges once again placed her name in headlines and raised questions about whether she had truly escaped the cycle she portrayed on screen. Pearson eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges and received a suspended sentence, serving brief time in custody before release on probation. Throughout these challenges, Pearson worked to reshape the narrative surrounding her life. She authored a memoir titled Grace After Midnight, detailing her childhood trauma, her conviction, and her years behind bars. In interviews, she frequently discussed the difficulty of breaking free from Baltimore's cycle of poverty and crime, and how easily young people could become trapped in the system with minimal hope of escape. Her story evolved beyond simple crime and punishment into something more complex, a testament to survival, the possibility of redemption, and the reality that second chances don't erase the past. Today, Felicia "Snoop" Pearson continues acting in independent films and makes appearances at events, but her legacy remains forever intertwined with both her real and fictional lives as an enforcer. To some, she represents proof that people can transform even the darkest chapters into something constructive. To others, she serves as a reminder that crime leaves permanent scars, and those affected may never accept seeing a perpetrator achieve fame. Her story stands alone on this list. A teenager convicted of murder who served time, then portrayed nearly the same existence she had once lived. Felicia Pearson's repeated rise and fall reveals the complicated intersection where crime, punishment, art, and reality collide, leaving behind an enduring question. Did Pearson truly escape her past, or did her past simply follow her onto television screens for the entire world to witness? Case 3. She embodied the girl next door archetype on primetime television, a rising talent with devoted fans and seemingly boundless potential. But Allison Mack's trajectory took a turn almost no one could have anticipated. The actress, beloved for playing a supportive best friend on screen, became notorious in real life for her involvement in one of America's most disturbing cult scandals. Born in Germany in 1982, while her father served overseas with the U.S. Army, Mack's family soon relocated to California. By her teenage years, she was already appearing in commercials and television roles. Her major breakthrough arrived in 2001 with casting as Chloe Sullivan on Smallville, the long-running series exploring Superman's formative years. Audiences adored her portrayal of the sharp-witted, fiercely loyal friend who consistently supported Clark Kent. For 10 seasons, she remained central to the show, and industry observers assumed she would smoothly transition into larger Hollywood roles. Off-camera, Mack's life appeared equally promising. She participated actively in charitable work, gave interviews championing female empowerment, and spoke warmly about her fan base. To outside observers, she seemed destined for decades more in the entertainment industry. But beneath that surface, another narrative was developing, one connected to a self-help organization called NXIVM. Mack first attended NXIVM workshops around 2006. Marketed as leadership development training, the organization promised to unlock human potential and teach rigorous self-discipline. Keith Raniere, its charismatic leader, presented himself as a visionary thinker. Over time, Mack became increasingly involved, ascending through organizational ranks and earning Raniere's trust. By the early 2010s, she wasn't merely a participant. She had become part of his inner circle. What had started as self-improvement seminars gradually revealed something far more sinister. NXIVM faced accusations of operating as a manipulative cult that drained followers financially and created secret subgroups where women were coerced into complete submission. Prosecutors later determined that Mack played a direct, active role in recruiting women into these clandestine groups. Behind closed doors, she persuaded them they were joining an exclusive sisterhood devoted to discipline and empowerment. The reality involved absolute obedience to Raniere and participation in degrading rituals. For years, these allegations remained hidden from public view. But in 2017, investigative journalists and former members began speaking publicly. Major newspaper exposés revealed NXIVM inner workings, and suddenly Allison Mack's name appeared not in entertainment publications but in crime reports. The revelations shocked fans who had grown up watching her heroic character on Smallville. How could someone so closely associated with goodness become linked to something so disturbing? Federal authorities acted swiftly. In April 2018, agents arrested Mack at her Brooklyn home. She faced charges including racketeering, conspiracy, and offenses related to forced labor. The indictment alleged she wasn't simply a follower, but an active recruiter who helped expand Raniere's control over vulnerable women. Images of Mack leaving court in handcuffs dominated headlines, cementing her dramatic downfall. The legal proceedings stretched across years with developments that kept the case prominently in public view. Initially entering a not guilty plea, Mack changed her position as Keith Raniere's trial approached. In April 2019, she pleaded guilty to racketeering and racketeering conspiracy, admitting in court that she had manipulated women into joining NXIVM's secret operations. Her tearful statement of remorse received widespread media coverage, though many questioned whether it reflected genuine regret or strategic calculation to reduce her sentence. Sentencing finally arrived in June 2021. Mack faced the possibility of spending decades behind bars. Prosecutors acknowledged her cooperation against Raniere, but emphasized the gravity of her actions. Victims testified about profound psychological damage and the betrayal they felt from someone who had recruited and guided them. The judge ultimately sentenced her to 3 years in federal prison along with financial penalties and community service obligations. Compared to the life sentence handed to Keith Raniere, Mack's punishment was considerably shorter, but it marked the complete obliteration of her career and reputation. Once celebrated for her Smallville role, she became permanently remembered as the actress who helped operate a cult. Her case became the subject of documentaries, podcasts, and endless media analysis. Today, Allison Mack has completed her sentence and been released, but her place in Hollywood no longer exists. She maintains a quiet life away from public attention, forever connected to one of television history's most shocking scandals. For her fans, the betrayal continues to sting. For critics, her case serves as a stark reminder of how influence and charisma can be twisted into manipulation when disguised as mentorship. Allison Mack's story transcends one actress's downfall. It reveals how easily trust can be exploited when power masquerades as guidance, leaving behind an unsettling question. How many similar stories remain concealed, waiting to be exposed? Case 4, it became one of the late 1980s most sensational criminal cases, a story that captivated America precisely because it didn't involve strangers or organized crime, but rather a suburban mother of 4. Betty Broderick once epitomized the affluent California housewife ideal. But years of marital dissolution, consuming jealousy, and escalating rage culminated in a double murder that made her a household name and guaranteed she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Born Elizabeth Ann Bisiglia in 1947 in Brooklyn, New York, Betty was one of 6 children raised in a strict Catholic household where expectations for women were unambiguous. Marry well, raise children, and support your husband's ambitions. Betty followed this prescribed path almost perfectly. In 1969, she married Daniel Broderick, an ambitious medical student she met during college in New York. The couple soon relocated to California, where Daniel switched from medicine to law, eventually becoming a highly successful medical malpractice attorney in San Diego. By the early 1980s, the Brodericks were living a life of considerable wealth and social privilege. They owned a beautiful home in La Jolla, socialized within upper-class circles, and sent their children to prestigious private schools. To outsiders, they appeared to be the perfect family. Betty devoted herself entirely to raising their 4 children while Daniel ascended to the pinnacle of his profession, becoming president of a local bar association and earning millions annually. But beneath this polished exterior, cracks were forming in the foundation. Daniel had hired a much younger assistant named Linda Kolkina, and by the mid-1980s, Betty suspected an affair. Her suspicions were confirmed when Daniel eventually left Betty for Linda, a betrayal that completely shattered Betty's world. The divorce battle that followed was extraordinarily bitter and protracted, with Betty feeling increasingly humiliated and marginalized. She accused Daniel of weaponizing his wealth and legal influence to manipulate court proceedings, limiting her financial resources and access to her children. Friends later described Betty as consumed by fury, utterly unable to release the sense of betrayal that dominated her thoughts. That anger manifested in shocking ways. Betty vandalized Daniel's property, left obscene and threatening messages on his answering machine, and even drove her car directly into his front door. Judges repeatedly admonished her for this behavior, but she insisted she was the victim of a powerful man systematically crushing her. By 1989, Daniel and Linda were preparing to marry while Betty's life spiraled further out of control. On the morning of November 5, 1989, Betty used her daughter's key to enter Daniel's house and walked into the bedroom where Daniel and Linda were sleeping. She fired 5 shots from a revolver. Both Daniel and Linda were struck, and neither survived. Betty fled the scene but surrendered to authorities hours later. The murders shocked San Diego's affluent community and rapidly became national news. How could a mother of 4 from an upper-class neighborhood commit such a crime? The trial became one of its era's most watched, broadcast across television networks, and dissected endlessly in tabloids and newspapers. Prosecutors argued Betty had planned the killings, motivated by jealousy and rage. essentially executing Daniel and Linda in their bed. The defense countered that Betty was a woman driven to the breaking point by years of emotional abuse, betrayal, and a divorce process that left her feeling completely powerless. They argued she had snapped in a moment of temporary insanity. The jury in her first trial in 1990 couldn't reach unanimous agreement, resulting in a mistrial. But in 1991, at her retrial, the outcome was definitive. Betty Broderick was convicted on 2 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 32 years to life in prison. She wouldn't be eligible for parole until serving at least 25 years. The sentencing marked the conclusion of one of American history's most famous domestic crime sagas. For some, Betty became a symbol of a woman pushed beyond endurance by a system and husband who held all the power. For others, she was simply a cold-blooded killer who refused to release her anger and move forward. These polarized reactions helped transform her into a cultural figure, inspiring books, documentaries, and even a season of the television series Dirty John, which dramatized her story for a new generation. Today, Betty Broderick remains imprisoned in California, her parole requests repeatedly denied. Now in her 70s, she continues arguing that she was fundamentally wronged, though courts have shown minimal sympathy. Her children remain divided, some publicly supporting her release, others insisting she must remain incarcerated. Betty's story endures not simply because of the crime itself, but because it unfolded at the very heart of suburban privilege. It demonstrated how anger, betrayal, and resentment can simmer behind even the most perfect facades. And when it boiled over in Betty's case, it destroyed not just 2 lives in that bedroom, but an entire family caught in the aftermath. Her case still raises questions decades later. Was she a victim of emotional abuse and inequitable power dynamics? Or was she simply unwilling to accept the end of a marriage? Whatever the interpretation, the result remains unchanged. Betty Broderick, once a La Jolla socialite and mother of 4, will likely spend the remainder of her life behind prison walls. Case 5. She was a struggling actress chasing minor roles in Hollywood, appearing briefly in blockbuster shows like The Walking Dead and The Vampire Diaries. But Shannon Guess Richardson's name would become infamous, not for her screen time, but for an act so bizarre and dangerous that it generated national headlines. In 2013, she transformed from small-time television extra to federal prisoner after a ricin-laced letter plot that stunned the entire nation. Born in Texas in 1977, Richardson grew up in a working-class environment and later pursued acting as a dream, though she never secured more than tiny background roles. She was credited under multiple names: Shannon Rogers from birth, later Shannon Guess after marriage. For years, she scraped by through auditions, occasionally booking work as an extra. Her most notable appearances were easy to miss: background work in The Walking Dead and a minor part in The Vampire Diaries. To those around her, she was chasing Hollywood but hadn't yet broken through. By 2013, Richardson's personal life was unraveling dramatically. She was trapped in a deteriorating marriage with her husband, Nathan Richardson. The couple battled over custody arrangements and finances, and their relationship had fractured beyond repair. But in June of that year, Shannon took a desperate, shocking step. She mailed letters laced with ricin, a deadly poison, addressed to President Barack Obama, New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and the head of a prominent gun control advocacy organization. The letters contained explicit threats warning recipients they would see what's in store if they continued pushing gun control legislation. They were designed to terrorize and demonstrate that someone was prepared to use violence to advance a political agenda. The discovery of ricin, a lethal toxin derived from castor beans, triggered alarms at the highest levels of government. Secret Service agents, FBI teams, and counterterrorism units launched an immediate, intensive investigation. The case rapidly became front-page news across the country. Who was attempting to poison the president and New York's mayor? Initially, Richardson attempted to frame her husband. She told investigators that Nathan was responsible, that she had discovered evidence pointing to him, and that she was merely reporting what she'd found. But her fabricated story quickly collapsed. Digital forensics revealed that materials for creating ricin had been purchased using her computer, traced directly to her online activity. Investigators discovered she had personally ordered castor beans online. The handwriting on the letters matched hers, and eventually her elaborate attempt to shift blame crumbled under overwhelming evidence. On June 7, 2013, Shannon Guess Richardson was arrested in Mount Pleasant, Texas. Her arrest stunned both her local community and entertainment press outlets. This wasn't a seasoned criminal or terrorist, but a mother of 6 who had once stood in the background of popular television shows. The fact that she had targeted 2 of the country's most visible political figures, the president and New York's mayor, made the case extraordinarily serious. Facing insurmountable evidence, Richardson chose to plead guilty. In December 2013, she admitted in federal court to possessing and producing a biological toxin for use as a weapon. The guilty plea was a shocking acknowledgement. This wasn't a crime of passion or minor error, but attempted bioterrorism. Prosecutors argued that even though the letters never physically harmed their intended targets, the intent itself was dangerous enough to warrant severe punishment. In July 2014, the court delivered its verdict. Shannon Guess Richardson was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole, followed by 5 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay substantial restitution for resources spent investigating and responding to her actions. During sentencing, she broke down in tears, apologizing and insisting she had acted from emotional turmoil. But for the government and the public, the sentence sent an unmistakable message. Threats against national leaders, especially involving biological agents, would receive the harshest possible consequences. The bizarre case fascinated media outlets because it combined elements that rarely intersect: a minor Hollywood actress, a collapsing marriage, and a plot involving one of the deadliest substances known to humanity. For many observers, it seemed almost surreal that someone who once walked through zombie apocalypse scenes as background talent was now serving nearly 2 decades in prison for targeting the president. Today, Shannon Guess Richardson remains incarcerated in federal prison. But her projected release date extends far into the 2030s. Her children are being raised without her, and her acting career is permanently finished. She's remembered not for her brief screen appearances, but for a reckless act that placed her among the ranks of domestic terrorists who threaten the nation's highest offices. Her case is frequently cited as an example of how personal turmoil, desperation, and catastrophically poor judgment can spiral into something devastating. From background roles on television to an 18-year federal prison sentence, her story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary crimes emerge from the most unlikely people. Case 6, she once dreamed of succeeding in Hollywood, securing small roles in television and film. But Amanda Perry Hayes would become far more infamous for a crime that was both disturbing and heartbreaking. In 2011, she and her husband, songwriter Grant Hayes, carried out the murder of his ex-girlfriend, and what followed shocked even veteran investigators. Born in 1974, Amanda Hayes grew up pursuing creative passions. By her 20s and 30s, she had begun exploring acting, appearing in minor roles on shows including The Sopranos and in films such as The Stepford Wives. These appearances were small, background-level parts, but they kept her connected to the entertainment industry she admired. By the late 2000s, she was living in North Carolina, married to Grant Hayes, a local musician who had achieved some recognition as a songwriter. To neighbors and friends, Amanda and Grant appeared to be a creative couple building a family. But behind closed doors, their relationship was marked by jealousy, control, and escalating conflict. Grant Hayes had previously been in a relationship with a young woman named Laura Ackerson, and together they had 2 small children. By 2011, the relationship between Grant and Laura had completely collapsed, and a bitter custody battle was unfolding in the courts. Amanda, now married to Grant, deeply resented Laura and reportedly viewed her as a constant obstacle in their lives. This resentment escalated into hatred with devastating consequences. In July of that year, Amanda and Grant devised a plan to permanently remove Laura from their existence. On July 13, 2011, Laura Ackerson went to Grant and Amanda's Raleigh apartment, reportedly to visit her children. She was never seen alive again. Prosecutors later argued that once inside, Laura was attacked, murdered, and her body dismembered. Amanda, alongside her husband, participated in the gruesome attempt to cover up the crime. The couple transported Laura's remains across state lines, driving all the way to Amanda's sister's home in Texas. Once there, they attempted to dispose of the evidence in a nearby creek, allegedly hoping that alligators in the water might consume what they had discarded. For weeks, Laura's disappearance was treated as a missing persons case. Friends and family pleaded desperately for information, pointing out how unusual it was for Laura not to check in about her children. Investigators grew suspicious as they pieced together her last known movements, which pointed directly back to the Hayes household. Soon, evidence began accumulating. Phone records, witness statements, and glaring inconsistencies in Amanda and Grant's account suggested something sinister had occurred. The truth emerged when investigators discovered human remains in the Texas Creek directly connected to Amanda and Grant Hayes. The discovery horrified the public, and the case rapidly gained widespread media attention. This wasn't merely a brutal crime involving the murder of a mother. It was committed by a couple who had presented themselves as respectable parents. Amanda's background in acting added another layer of disturbing detail for tabloids, ensuring national coverage. The trial began in 2014, with Amanda and Grant facing charges of second-degree murder and related offenses. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture. Amanda and Grant had plotted together, lured Laura into a trap, and then gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal it. Amanda's defense argued she had been manipulated by her husband, that Grant was the driving force, and that she had been caught up in his control. But evidence of her active participation in transporting and attempting to dispose of Laura's body was undeniable. The jury found Amanda Hayes guilty of second-degree murder in North Carolina. She was sentenced to 13 to 16 years in prison, but her legal troubles didn't end there. Texas prosecutors pursued additional charges for tampering with and attempting to conceal a corpse. In 2016, she faced trial in Texas, where the gruesome details of dumping remains into the creek were recounted in court. That jury also found her guilty, and Amanda received an additional 20-year prison sentence to run consecutively after her North Carolina term. The combined sentences ensured Amanda Hayes would spend decades behind bars. For Laura Ackerson's family, the verdicts brought some measure of justice, though nothing could replace the young mother whose life had been taken. The case became a chilling reminder of how domestic disputes and custody battles, when fueled by hatred and desperation, can transform into tragedy. Today, Amanda Perry Hayes remains incarcerated, serving her sentences with no realistic prospect of early release. Her story, once connected to small appearances in Hollywood, is now permanently tied to one of recent North Carolina history's most disturbing crimes. The case of Amanda Hayes highlights the extremes of jealousy and resentment, and how the desire to erase a rival can lead to destruction for everyone involved. From television sets to prison walls, her fall represents a stark reminder of how rapidly lives can spiral into darkness. Case 7, Sometimes Truth Proves Stranger Than Fiction, and in Aisling Tucker Moore-Reed's case, the two became nearly impossible to distinguish. She was an Oregon actress and aspiring horror film star whose real-life crime eerily mirrored the role she was cast to portray. By the time her trial reached headlines, the unsettling overlap between her acting and her actual life made her one of the most infamous courtroom stories in recent years. Born in 1989, Aisling Tucker Moore-Reed grew up in Oregon with ambitions of becoming a writer and actress. She studied journalism in college, wrote freelance articles, and pursued creative endeavors. But she also carried family tensions that would ultimately erupt into violence. In 2016, a dispute over family property escalated into tragedy that changed everything. On July 26, 2016, Moore-Reed was at her mother's home in rural Oregon when an argument erupted with her uncle, Shane Moore. The dispute centered on inheritance issues and who held rights to family property. According to investigators, the confrontation grew increasingly heated. hole. In the chaos, Moore Reed retrieved a handgun. When her uncle entered the doorway, she pulled the trigger. The single shot proved fatal, and Shane Moore died at the scene. Police responded immediately, and Moore Reed was arrested. She initially claimed she had acted in self-defense, fearing her uncle during the confrontation. But prosecutors charged her with manslaughter and unlawful use of a weapon, arguing her actions extended far beyond legitimate self-protection. After a brief period in custody, she was released on bail pending trial. What happened next made her case infamous. While awaiting trial for killing her uncle, Moore Reed auditioned for and was cast in a low-budget horror movie titled From the Dark. The irony was chilling. A real-life defendant in a homicide case acting out the very crime she had been accused of committing. Filming proceeded and the project was completed even before her legal fate was decided. When this connection became public knowledge, headlines exploded. News outlets quickly branded it the horror film actress murder case, pointing out the unsettling parallels between her fictional role and her reality. Reporters covered not only the trial proceedings but also the bizarre fact that the accused was simultaneously starring in a movie about the exact type of violence she faced charges for in real life. By 2019, as her trial approached, prosecutors compiled witness testimony, forensic evidence, and statements from her own family members. They argued the killing was not justified self-defense, but a reckless act fueled by anger and family conflict. Defense attorneys continued insisting she had felt genuinely threatened in the moment. The back and forth set the stage for one of Oregon's most closely watched trials in years. In January 2020, Moore Reed decided not to risk a jury verdict. She entered a guilty plea to first-degree manslaughter. In court, she admitted responsibility for her uncle's death while again emphasizing she had believed herself to be in danger. The plea deal avoided the possibility of a much longer sentence, but cemented her status as a convicted felon. The judge handed down a sentence of 75 months in prison. Just over 6 years. For Shane Moore's family, it represented a measure of justice, though his loss could never be undone. For Moore Reed, it marked the end of both her acting ambitions and her freedom. The story, however, didn't fade quietly. Media outlets across the country covered her sentencing, with the eerie overlap between her horror film and her real-life crime always prominently highlighted. Clips from the Dark were replayed in news reports, emphasizing the uncanny parallel of an actress playing a killer while facing trial for actual killing. The unsettling coincidence captured public imagination and made her case one of the strangest intersections of Hollywood and true crime. Today, Aisling Tucker Moore Reed is serving her sentence in Oregon with eligibility for release in the mid-2020s. But even once freed, her life will never return to what it was. Her acting career is finished, her reputation destroyed, and her name forever tied to the haunting story of fiction bleeding into reality. The horror film actress murder case remains a striking reminder of how quickly lives can unravel and how boundaries between art and real life can sometimes blur in ways no one could have scripted. From promising journalist and aspiring actress to convicted killer behind bars, Aisling Tucker Moore Reed's story closes this chapter of celebrities whose crimes shocked the nation. And it leaves behind one final question. When reality becomes indistinguishable from performance, can anyone truly separate the role from the person who plays it?